Hello, everybody. It is Monday, December the 23rd, 2024. Just a week left of 2024. Long-time viewers, listeners of the show know that we focused on the Financial Times Business Book of the Year for this year. We've done excellent interviews, I thought, with all the authors: Daniel Susskind, Michael Morris, Parmy Olson, Andrew Scott, and Raj Shah and Chris Kirchhoff, who wrote Unit X. And a couple of weeks ago, these were the 6 books that were shortlisted for the award a couple of weeks ago. They announced the winner, and it was Parmy Olson for Supremacy, her book about Google and AI, and OpenAI. I thought it was a particularly appropriate decision. The book is called Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. Often these subtitles are exaggerated, but I think this race really will change the world. And I'm thrilled that Parmy is joining us again from London, where she lives. Parmy Olson, congratulations on the award.
Thank you very much. It was an honor. It was a crazy experience, and I'm honestly still processing it.
Well, I'm going to ask you the dumb question, and I'm sure you'll give me the dumb answer. Did you expect to win?
Absolutely not. I thought I was in a very esteemed group of other authors who'd written some really fantastic books. And I didn't even have anything really ready to say when I had to go up on stage. Luckily, there's no like big acceptance speech. You just kind of say a few words of acknowledgement. But it was all very awkward because I truly wasn't expecting it. So it was a bit surreal, to be honest, but wonderful as well.
Well, if you didn't have something to say, I'd be lucky they wouldn't take the award away if you didn't have a prepared speech.
Maybe they should have.
But in all seriousness, it's an important book about, of course, the most important subject, I think, these days, AI and the race that will change the world. When did you write the book? Tell me about its narrative in terms of writing and research. I know it didn't take you that long. It's so hard to write a book about AI because things are changing almost from week to week.
100%, and that was actually one of the concerns that I was hearing from publishers when I was first pitching it with my agent. I got the idea probably in January of 2023, so about a month after ChatGPT came out. And the reason I wanted to write the book was because I had done some reporting back when I was at the Wall Street Journal about how DeepMind had been trying to break away from Google secretly. And the founders of basically the world's most prominent AI lab were really worried about Google having control of this ultra powerful AI they were trying to build. And they were kind of trying to protect the technology from the supremacy of a large corporate organization. I mean, they just weren't able to put in to spin out or to put in the kind of oversight that they thought would be appropriate for such powerful technology. And I remember thinking when ChatGPT came out, like, gosh, there's this whole story going on behind the scenes where the people building this stuff, they're trying to build this godlike technology. And at the same time, they're also quite worried about who's going to control it. And there's been this grappling almost for control and for putting in proper oversight of the technology over the last few years that nobody seems to know about. And it's probably something that I should bring to light. And it's not just, of course, DeepMind that was concerned about this. It was also OpenAI. Sam Altman tried to start OpenAI as a nonprofit, and that didn't really work out. There was quite a few kind of
Although, to be fair, Parmy, Elon Musk, who I hope is watching this, Musk might claim that he was the one who founded OpenAI. Yeah, the idea of OpenAI as a nonprofit dedicated to controlling AI reflected more Musk's thinking than Altman's.
It was Altman's too, though. I think they were both quite on the same page about that. And it was actually Altman who proposed the idea to Elon Musk over email about having this organization as an open organization that would collaborate with other organizations when they eventually got close to building AGI. So I wouldn't put it all on Musk. It was also Altman who was pushing for that.
So would it be fair to say that I know you compare and contrast Altman and Hassabis in the book, and that's the core of its narrative. and DeepMinds and OpenAI.
Yeah.
But would it be fair to say that in that sense, Sam Altman and Demis Hassabis share a sense of responsibility? They understand that this technology might really change the world, this kind of godlike technology.
Yes, of course. They absolutely do. And I think that's why they and in many ways this is why I find them so fascinating as entrepreneurs. So many technology entrepreneurs are like this. They see a future and they believe in it. They have such belief in it that they just devote their entire lives and careers and reputations on building out that future that they're envisioning. And this was particularly almost grandiose and galactic in its scale and scope to try and build artificial general intelligence. And what I found particularly fascinating about Demis Hassabis was that he wanted to build this already back in 2010, back when this idea of building artificial general intelligence was very much seen as a fringe theory. If you were in computer science and you brought it up, you'd be laughed out of the room. It was just not taken seriously. But he kind of believed in it and started a business based on building this eventual technology. So that, sorry, to your point, so that it could do great things for humanity, including curing cancer, figuring out ways to solve all sorts of horrible diseases, solving climate change, finding new energy sources, and just kind of solving these intractable problems that humans have grappled with for many, many years, these sort of social problems, economic problems, that we would abolish the economy potentially, not even have to use money. Who knows? It was all very kind of almost abstract and utopian in scope, but these were the kinds of things that he was running the business based on to eventually build out this future. And
So
Sam
let's
was as well.
so let's go back to 2024. You started the book, as you say, in 2023. So much has happened in 2024. I mean, at the end of
Yes.
2023, you had the whole corporate crisis at Altman, him being pushed out and then being invited back. In 2024, you had massive investment, incomparable, I think, investment in AI.
Yes.
You had, of course, Demis Hassabis winning the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. You
Yeah.
had Geoffrey Hinton winning it for physics. Would it be fair to say that 2024 is the year of AI? I mean, in every
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it almost feels like maybe I shouldn't say this, but like me winning this award for the FT Book Award is almost kind of reflective of that. Like, of course, the AI book within all the other books is going to be the one to win. And then in the when the Nobel Prizes came out, it kind of almost felt like a message from the Nobel Committee of recognizing that artificial intelligence and machine learning really was becoming such an important force in science. And
I would
in
reverse
the
that, Parmy. I wouldn't be shy. I would tell, next time you talk to Hassabis or Hinton, I would tell them that the only reason they won the Nobels this year was because the committee knew that your book was going to win the FT Book of the Year.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that to them with a straight face. That will go down very well, I'm sure. Um, no, so I do think I do think this has been the year when AI is kind of being recognized as being incredibly important, even though it's been going on behind the scenes. I mean, ChatGPT came out 2 years ago now. It was late November, but it was really in 2024, with these, with things like the Nobel Prize recognizing that I think people realize that this is something that's really going to change many different parts of our lives, whether it's education or healthcare, or government, or business, or just legal firms, hedge funds. Everyone's trying it. Everyone's experimenting with it, and it's
Well,
not
are
going
they?
to.
Is that Hassabis in an interesting FT interview talked about his Nobel Prize being what he called a watershed moment for AI. But I wonder whether 2024, and this came up in my weekly tech show with Keith Tier, who's a Silicon Valley investor, an entrepreneur. I wonder whether it's really having an impact on the world. It's having an impact on guys like Keith Tier who use it for everything, like cooking
Yeah.
and programming.
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
more mainstream people like myself, I'm not a Luddite, but I'm not an early adapter, or certainly like Keith. There still isn't, in my view, and correct me please if I'm wrong, in 2024, there's no real, certainly no AI personal assistant that works yet. So at the moment, still in 2024, AI is more potential than actuality. Is that fair for ordinary consumers?
I think it's both. I think there's still a lot of potential and a lot of room for it to be used in all sorts of different categories and by different people. I think it also kind of depends on who you speak to. I find that like the younger cohort of people tend to use it more. A lot of students are using it. And
Some
it's just,
illegally, perhaps rather
yeah.
naughtily for writing their
Well,
essays.
and then, well, to that point, I think that's also what makes this all a little bit difficult to parse in terms of seeing usage, because I think a lot of people use it but don't want to talk about the fact that they're using it, like students, even teachers, working professionals. You know, if you're an analyst or a researcher, how much do you really want to, or you're even a consultant, um, for like a major consulting firm, how much do you really want to attribute the work that you're doing to the analysis that's being provided by a large language model
Eh,
versus your own brain? So there's like, I think there's these competing forces in terms of incentives. Like for tech companies, there's great incentive to show that these technologies are working, but for some, also for businesses who are using this tech, um, some of them are quite shy to talk about how they're using it as a case study because they don't want to reveal that they might be using something that could be disruptive to their employee base. And this just, I'm just saying this because this is stuff I've heard from AI
mm.
firms like Anthropic, and others like them who are selling these large language models. And they're saying, actually, it's quite difficult to get their customers to go public as case studies, to help them market the use of these tools for this exact reason.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. Perhaps it's rather like these new diet pills. No one wants to acknowledge them,
Yeah.
but now everyone's slimming down. Coming back to
Yeah, right.
2024, you brought up Anthropic. Anthropic, in this race for changing the world, there's obviously OpenAI and Google Gemini, but there's also Anthropic.
Yeah.
Your book doesn't really address that. Anthropic increasingly is the dark horse.
Yeah.
In 2024, are there other players, or in terms of this race to change the world, are you surprised with the fact that Anthropic is the choice of more and more people, that it seems to be compelling? And in an odd kind of way, it's what OpenAI was originally set up to do, which was to be trusted to be more of a responsible nonprofit initiative with AI.
Right. Yeah. So Anthropic is set up as like a public benefit, as far as I understand. They're quite a nonprofit, but kind of things to that as they can still be investors. Um, they have a strong focus on safety, in large part because of that's what they were founded on. Uh, Founders were, it was quite a group of them were part of OpenAI because they were concerned about OpenAI's commercial folks and the speed at which it was deploying technology without checking for safety, and find that Claude, their large language model, actually hits the benchmark, so competitive with the likes of open platform, so Google, but it can't do a lot of things that products can, for example, generate images, or very much still just a language. But it, there's a lot of kind of checks place, and there, I think, just from what I've heard anecdotally, it doesn't hallucinate much as some of
So
these
let's
other
come
models.
back,
What I'm curious about, because
Parmy, let's come back to the book. The book, as you say, when did you finish writing it? No, when?
I actually finished writing when finished writing it in sort of late 2023, and of course we had the crazy news Altman was fired from OpenAI, and I found out just as I was like walking on one, because it was something like 11:30 And so it was like clear 8 hours before in California. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to change. I have to add this to the book. So my editor was very flexible about it. They allowed me to kind of, a couple thousand words, just encapsulating the story and what it all meant. So returning to, so I think I guess that I think I ended up finishing it in January.
So we've had pretty much a year, and my question is, I know it's a slightly unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. If you were writing the book now, a year later, what would you have added? What's happened in 2024 that adds to the narrative, or perhaps challenges your idea that that the race to change the world is really between Demis Hassabis and Sam Altman?
No, that's a great question. I think now, one thing I would kind of question is my premise about this really being a kind of two-horse race between OpenAI and Google. And I think for the most, it still kind of is, because obviously Apple, being another big tech company, hasn't really produced AI that's actually, it's quite terrible. Apple and people who've used it on the latest iPhones, it makes mistakes with its summarization. It's just nowhere near where OpenAI and Google. Amazon's kind of getting there, but they don't really have a consumer-based product than ChatGPT. And I'm not ahead in terms of market share for enterprise sales of their own AI. But I would, if I write it now, I would probably say more about AI, and in particular what Meta is doing with Llama, and just kind of what that could mean for potentially disrupting the kind of concentration of power that's happening with AI right now. This kind of stranglehold on the technology that is by just a couple of really large tech companies. Here now we see these are using open source models from Meta, or open source models from Mistral in France, and a couple of other companies that are doing making similar efforts. Hugging Face is a French company that has this online hub, this website you go to. You could just see all these open source AI models that are available, and there's lots of them. So I would, if I could write it, and again, I would just explore that a little bit more. I mean, I think it's not, for example, with Meta, I'm, on the other hand, a little bit skeptical that Mark Zuckerberg wants to just give away.
Right, and that was
AI
going to be
my
question. Mark Zuckerberg is not Father Christmas. He's not in the business of giving anything away. And I'm always a little skeptical of even this term open source, because open source isn't always quite as open as people imagine. I mean, what's in it for Zuckerberg here? Is it an attack on OpenAI and Google, or is it his way of sort of somehow making AI part of the Facebook network?
It's part of him just trying to own the technology in the same way that he wants to kind of own the platform that people will connect to. I think another theory, which I think holds a lot of water, is that he wants to just see a lot of AI generated content on the internet, because the more content there is, the more likely people are going to go onto his platforms like Instagram and Facebook and look at stuff. And he even said this in a recent quarterly earnings call, where he was saying, we want to see more AI generated content, AI generated images and videos on Facebook. We hope to see more of that, because that will lead to more people just view on their feeds, looking at stuff. I mean, I find that a little bit dystopian, like the idea of lots more AI generated images and fake photos and AI generated videos kind of taking over a large proportion of the content we view online. But for Facebook and Meta as a business, that could be quite good.
I mean, you put Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp together. It's interesting. You use the term Zuckerberg might want to own the technology, and it's a kind of Freudian slip, given that he's into open source. Can he own the technology and at the same time commit to open source? What does
I don't think he
open
can.
source even mean with OpenAI, Parmy?
Well, with Meta, it's that Mark Zuckerberg has actually been criticized by one of the organizations that open source technology as being open source, and they have said shouldn't use that term. It's not open source. It's open weights because you release the weights, which are kind of a technical part of the model, but it's not strictly open source. And another thing, if you look at Meta's open source model, it's called Llama, and if you look at some of the recent ones that were put out over the last couple of years at their terms of service, they've actually become increasingly just a little bit more restrictive each time. And one prediction that I've seen floating around is that in 2025, Zuckerberg's actually going to start charging for people to use Llama, and it isn't going to be open source anymore, that it is just gradually stepping towards becoming closed source. So we might see something like that happen. If he doesn't charge, we might just see more restrictions on the technology. So to answer your question, it won't be very open.
And then just to clarify this idea of open source for developers, what is the business model both for Gemini, for Hasabis's initiative, and OpenAI? Is it a sort of a platform technology where they offer APIs to developers, and that's their way of sort of infiltrating and owning the internet?
Yeah, so with OpenAI, there's two parts to the business. There's the consumer part where they derive revenue from subscriptions that people pay for ChatGPT Pro, and that's I think it's something like $20.
Yeah, it's 20. Although they just came out with a
$200
$200 sort of ultimate package as well.
Yes, right. Yes, and then they also earn money on the from enterprise customers for API calls for using their various platforms. And it's a similar thing with Google. So if you use Gemini and you want to use the Pro version, you can subscribe to it as a consumer. If you're a business, you can sort of access the API by paying per API call or whatever kind of bespoke package you.
So there was an interesting piece a couple of weeks ago from the New York Times. These are classic pieces during tech booms. Is the tech industry already on the cusp of an AI slowdown? I'm sure you've addressed this in some of your Bloomberg columns.
I have, yes.
To what extent, though, has or is the Anthropic product, you talk that they're stronger really on the text side as opposed to images and video, but to what extent is Gemini and OpenAI or ChatGPT, to what extent are they becoming commodified? Are they becoming similar? Or how would you distinguish Gemini from ChatGPT?
Well, actually, that's a great question, and I think that's a problem for those businesses, and it's something that I've heard from companies who use their products. So, for example, I was talking to a startup in Silicon Valley a few months ago, and they were saying, we switch between Gemini and GPT-4 and Llama. We just switch between them. There's friction, and products have no moat. So it does mean that as businesses, they're kind of becoming commoditized. So I think that's something that the likes of Google and OpenAI are going to work on next year to try and differentiate their products and make them not just something that you want to stick with it, not just flip between this and whatever else because for whatever reason. I think it's really interesting. Like, so for example, with OpenAI, they've put so many different products on the table now. They've got Sora, which is the video generation tool. They've got agentic AI thing. They've got model. They've got the smaller models. They've got the bigger models. And one thing that I heard that kind of came, there was like some kind of public statement made by Kevin Weil, who's the product manager, chief product officer at OpenAI. And he was kind of suggesting that eventually chat would have more what they call agentic abilities. So it'll be able to work with different apps. Right now, it can read data. The latest update allows it to read data from certain coding apps and Apple Notes and a couple of other apps. It can't actually do anything to them, But next year, I think that's what OpenAI wants ChatGPT to do. And I think all these other things that they've put out on the table, like the video generation, the coding, all of that, maybe, maybe this is just my prediction. All these things will come under the umbrella of ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will become almost like this super app. I can do
Right,
all
like,
these
and of
things,
course,
and it can
yeah,
interact.
the super app is, when you hear that term, you think of Elon Musk. I want to get to
Yes, yeah,
2025
yeah.
next, but before we get there, in terms of 2024, who's had a better year,
Hmm.
Hassabis or Altman, would you say? I mean, Google's had a very strong end of the year.
Yeah,
Altman's had certainly a rocky beginning, although maybe in some
yeah.
ways it's become stronger. Who do you think, in terms of this race that would change the world, who's in a stronger position at the end of 2024?
I would say Google. Um, I mean, and well, you did ask Hassabis or Altman, and I guess from a personal perspective, Hassabis, he did
Well,
just win
both.
the
I mean,
Nobel
Hassabis,
Prize. So yeah,
Altman, Google, OpenAI, they're sort of
yeah. So I would,
interchangeable, I think.
yeah, right. And so I would say Hassabis, and Google, in large part because they just do seem to have really caught up quite quickly. They just come roaring back over this past year. If you remember at the beginning of the year, they were releasing their first release of AI overviews, which is like this summary that comes at the top of search results. I'm sure everybody's seen it at least once. Um, it was making mistakes, in the demos that they were first releasing. There were
Yeah, it was very
mistakes in the
embarrassing. There
demos.
were lots of scandals.
And there was the image generation tool, which was deemed too woke because it was
Yeah.
generating images of black Nazis, and and of course they took that offline. And since then, they've actually released quite some models. Like the latest versions of Gemini have really hit a lot of the benchmarks that some of the latest models from OpenAI have hit. They're just as good. And just for example, another thing they released recently was called VO2. I'm on a wait list for this. It's like a video generation tool,
Yeah.
and it's just incredible. OpenAI has a video generation tool as well called Sora. But if you ask both of them to generate images of, say, dogs running along the beach in wet weather, the Google version will just generate something that is way more realistic and detailed, hyper detailed. And so I think the company has really caught up to a large degree. And the thing that Hassabis and Google have as an advantage over OpenAI is just their scale. They have so many users that they can just put these things out to, deploy this technology to, so that it gets used immediately. Whereas OpenAI is still kind of starting. Well, it started from ground zero. Obviously, it's got market share now, but it's still trying to grow its
Do you
market
think, I
share.
mean, you look very carefully, and I think this is why the book's so interesting. You're the first person to really do this. You looked at the corporate structure of Google. Is this one of the reasons? Is because Hassabis has got a kind of carte blanche within Google to essentially use all the resources he needs. They have infinite financial and technological resources, or about as infinite as any company could have.
Yeah.
That he's trusted within Google. Obviously, the Nobel Prize helped. Whereas Altman and OpenAI is still a startup and having to deal with all sorts of complicated startup issues, business issues.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair? Is that one of the
Oh,
reasons
sorry.
why Hassabis has, or Google has caught up?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that just kind of extends on the point I made earlier that Google is coming from a place where it already has this incredible market share, and it's got this huge user base of billions of people who use search. One of the things that Google has said that it might be, or sorry, Google hasn't said this, but some recent reporting, I think from the Information and TechCrunch, said that Google was going to be introducing a kind of AI mode to their search. So it's just different to AI overviews, but essentially, when you use search, you'll have the option to use kind of switch to something that looks like
Mm,
ChatGPT or Gemini. And again, Google, this is deploying to just, it already has like hundreds and millions of, even billions of people use Google every day. So that's a huge advantage. over OpenAI. I think the only there's of course a downside to that, which is they're so big that they've caught the attention of antitrust regulators. And of course, there's this DOJ suit in the works where there's talk of trying to break off Chrome, and a judge has found that Google has been too anti-competitive with its search engines, and so it's possible that it could also face some kind of regulatory pushback if it tries to
Although
make its
they're
search
always
engine.
fighting, the regulators are always fighting yesterday or last month or last year or last century's war. The
Yes,
decision to break off Chrome doesn't impact this in any way. What
but
about
it
the issue of?
can. Well, no,
Sorry,
I
go
would
on.
say that it could affect what Google chooses to do. So, for example, if you look at it, and yes, regulators can be slow, but look, for example, at OpenAI voice mode. It actually took a long time for ChatGPT's voice mode to come to Europe, because there were concerns about some of the emotion recognition that it did and how that wasn't in compliance with the AI Act. And so I think some companies are being careful about what they release in case it does end up um, attracting regulatory scrutiny or potential fine or whatever else. And so I think if they're with all the antitrust scrutiny, that could mean maybe that Google doesn't release this AI mode. It's kind of up in the air, or maybe they don't. Maybe they won't release it, or I don't know. I wouldn't discount the regulatory scrutiny as kind of having an effect here on what these companies do end up releasing,
And of
particularly
course,
for
Google's
Google.
also having to deal with this issue of cannibalizing its market. It's so dominant in
Yes,
search, so it doesn't
yeah,
want to. It doesn't want to transform its search engine into an AI platform until it's ready. One other
yes,
question.
exactly. It's a huge question how that's going to work for its business.
One company is interesting. You brought up Facebook, you brought up Anthropic. We've talked about Google and OpenAI. The one company that was on everyone's lips at the end of last year and has sort of faded a little bit into the background is Microsoft. Has this been a
Yeah.
bad year for Microsoft? My sense is that they haven't necessarily managed their OpenAI relationship in the most effective way. Is that fair, or are they prisoners to OpenAI and they didn't have many
Yeah.
choices here?
Yeah, I think I'm really curious. I'd love to know what's going on behind the scenes between OpenAI and Microsoft in terms of the relationship between Sam Altman and Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. Obviously, they have a partnership, they have a contract, they have revenue that is being shared between them. But at the end of the day, Microsoft is still financially doing incredibly well out of this relationship. And if you look at every quarter that it's reported earnings this past year, it's seen between 10 and 30% increases in revenue from its cloud business. So this is absolutely AI, and the OpenAI partnership has absolutely helped its business. Bing, which was the Microsoft search engine that was being powered by OpenAI, kind of at the beginning of all this, maybe a year and a half ago, everybody was talking about Bing coming back, the phoenix rising from the ashes. But actually, if you look at its market share versus Google, it's barely made a dent on Google's grasp of the search end of the market for search. So I think in some ways Microsoft has done really well out of this, but in other ways it hasn't quite succeeded in the way that I think it wanted to.
Yeah, and you've mentioned personalities. Of course, Hassabis's partner, founding partner, I think, at DeepMind was Mustafa Suleyman, who went over to
Yeah.
Google, then got pushed out of there, and is now head of of AI at Microsoft. One of
Yes.
the forecasts for 2025 from a tech correspondent was that Solomon would get pushed out of Microsoft. Is he still an important player? You mentioned Nadella. You haven't mentioned Solomon yet.
Yeah. I think it's tricky because Microsoft, first of all, is such a unique company to work for. If you look at a lot of the people who are in leadership roles, they're people that have been there for many, many years, like Satya. Um, and I think Mustafa Suleiman coming in as a new kind of outside entrant already is going to make it challenging for him to just kind of plug into the bureaucracy and the culture of Microsoft. And he's a charismatic guy. People at DeepMind who worked under him really gravitated towards him. There were people that were just happy to quit their previous jobs so that they could work for him, because he was very good at kind of dispelling, or sorry, not dispelling, just kind of getting people to believe in the idea of AGI and this utopian vision that he and Demis were chasing. On the other hand, there were some controversies about his management style, that he was some people said he had some bullying behavior.
Which
He
is
had
why
some
he got pushed
coaching,
out of Google, right?
and he had some coaching to deal with that. Sorry, that's why he was pushed. That's why he left DeepMind, and then went to Google as a vice president, and had a team of people, but it was a small team. So I don't know. I think it's kind of it's tricky. Like, how I think it's going to be it's going to be a difficult task for him to manage a lot of people at Microsoft. It's such a big remit to be kind of running consumer AI at the
Yeah,
company.
that's
It's
your
such an
polite
important
way, I think,
part.
Parmy, of suggesting that Mustafa Suleyman, whose book on AI, an interesting book, actually was shortlisted last year for the FT Book of the Year.
Yes.
So let's get to 2025. You've mentioned AGI. Altman last week said that, and I'm quoting, that it's a less useful term with O1, their latest version of ChatGPT. Could 2025 be the year where this term AGI becomes not just science fictional?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think it's already there. Like,
You
this
might
year, people
define
have
the
been.
word and tell us what you understand by it, because everyone seems to have different understandings.
Well, artificial general intelligence, as I understand it from how technologists are talking about it, is a version of a version of a computer that can process information in the same way the human brain can, and it can carry out tasks, cognitive tasks, in a general way. So it can't just generate text or just generate images or videos. It can do all those things, and it can reason, and it can, kind of connect the dots, essentially, because that's what makes the human brain so unique, is that we don't just do one thing. We can be creative, and we can also calculate numbers. And I think actually maybe that's the direction that OpenAI is going in.
Someone is at the ring door.
Sorry, there's someone. Should I start again?
No, continue. It's probably
Okay.
Sam Altman trying to disturb.
I'm sure it is. So yeah, I think that's almost the direction that OpenAI seems to be going in, and has all these pieces on the board of these various services, these various tools. And if it can combine them all together under ChatGPT or some singular tool, then you've got this kind of general purpose AI tool. And that's what I think a lot of these companies are aiming for, is something that kind of emulates human cognition, the general kind of benefits of that, just as well as they can. I think people are already talking about AGI this year, but yeah, maybe they'll talk about it more, especially as companies like OpenAI try and do that.
Let's also think about 2025 in other senses. There's lots of variables here. I'm sure you heard, Parmy, you're an American in London, that there was an election last month where certain Donald
Yes.
Trump is the next president. Apparently, he wants the US to dominate AI. In terms of your narrative, I don't want to turn this into another boring conversation about Trump. We don't really quite know what he's going to do, but he does talk about AI a lot, and he's announced various AI czars and czarinas. Could Trump influence this race to change the world? I mean, both Google and OpenAI are American companies, although, of course, Hassabis is based in London, and Sam Altman has rather poor relations with Elon Musk, who supposedly is very close, at least at the moment, to Trump. How could the Trump presidency and its embrace of AI, or its perhaps regulation of AI, how might that affect the race in 2025?
Well, if you'd asked me this a couple of weeks ago, or maybe more like a month ago, I would have said, I think we're going to have some. I don't think it's going to be lax regulation from Trump because of Elon Musk. And Elon Musk has for years appeared to have quite a genuine concern about the existential risk of AI. That's why he started Neuralink. That's why, he kind of ended his friendship with Larry Page, was an argument over the existential risk of AI. He seems to really care about this. And so my belief for a while was that Elon Musk would just, you know, encourage Trump to not rescind Biden's executive order on AI, which had a lot of safety checks on AI, but keep that in, or keep something similar in place for that, and maintain some quite strict safety regulations for builders of AI. Now, one thing I keep hearing from people is Elon Musk is like just becoming too popular a guy. He's trying to encroach on Trump's power, and probably their relationship is going to fall apart at some point in the next few months, which means that this effort to put in more safety regulations on his part probably won't go very far, and will probably go back to a more kind of light touch regulation that you would expect under someone like Donald Trump on his own. So yeah, I think it's very possible that next year we'll see, yeah, a rescinding of Biden's executive order on AI, and a real effort to just sort of encourage AI companies to continue building and stay ahead of China, rather than to put perhaps the necessary checks and balances they need into how they're building these things.
And is it conceivable that Musk's company, XAI, which has raised several $billions at I think a $40 billion valuation, that could become a player in the race too?
I mean, Grok, their main large language model, has been seen as to be quite good. I just don't see people using it en masse. It's sort of like if you're a Twitter power user, then maybe you use Grok, but I just don't know why a business like they don't have an enterprise place. Why would a consumer want to use their product? I don't see them as like a particularly mainstream player.
That's an interesting observation. What about OpenAI's non-profit routes, all these corporate shenanigans that
Yeah.
exploded in November of last year? There's an interesting
Mhm.
Times piece on how OpenAI hopes to sever its non-profit roots. And they got into the fact that Altman and his colleagues at OpenAI need to figure out a fair price for ceding control over a technology that might change the world. Is it conceivable, Parmy, that this shift from a non-profit to a for-profit company within OpenAI might derail them in 2025 in this race where Google is steaming ahead and doesn't have these issues, and you have other players like Anthropic and even XAI?
I can't see how it would derail them. If they become a for-profit company, that's something that, this is really a business that is just so incredibly lucrative for a number of businesses, and particularly tech tech giants, but also investors and venture capitalists who are hoping to cash out eventually. One of the recent funding rounds from OpenAI, you had Masayoshi Son, who runs the Vision Fund, putting a huge amount of money into the company, perhaps feeling like he didn't get in early enough. So now he's finally getting in on the AI race, and on one of the hottest players. And then he also raised money from other big investors too. So I think that just really illustrated how much appetite there still is for OpenAI and for this technology. And I think if OpenAI continues to kind of break away from its nonprofit roots and become a for-profit organization, whether it's a public benefit corporation in the same way Anthropic is, that's not going to do anything to investor appetite. If anything, it'll increase.
Well, finally, Palm, you've been very generous with your time. Let's fast forward a year to December the 23rd, 2025. Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to ask you to make a fool of yourself by predicting something that's impossible to predict. But what should we be looking for in a year's time in terms of this remarkable narrative of AI? What would surprise you in a year's time, and what would surprise you less, shall we say, in terms of projecting forward a year?
Well, I think it's a great question. What would surprise me is, I suppose, if OpenAI is still kind of seen as the leading company with the leading product, just because
Mm.
Google really does seem to be steaming ahead. And if you just look at OpenAI's financials, I think they projected something like 5 billion in revenue for this year, for 2024. But the projected losses are something like 7 billion. So they're very much still in the red, even though they have first mover advantage and they have an incredibly competitive product. But I think Google is just such a heavy hitter. And I don't think, in spite of what I said about antitrust regulations potentially holding Google back in terms of how it upgrades its search tool, I don't think that's really going to stop it. I think it really has a huge advantage in having all these users at its fingertips. And I really think in December next year, we'll be talking about about Google and just kind of the impact that it's had on companies who are using its AI. So yeah, if we're talking about a two-horse race here, I think Google is really going to be the one that's ahead.
And we touched on this last time. Is it conceivable that Demis Hassabis will be the CEO of Google in a year's time?
I would be very. It's hard for me to see it, but I wouldn't discount it. If AI is such an important part of the business, Demis has reached one of his big personal goals, which was to win a Nobel Prize. And he's wanted DeepMind to win multiple Nobel Prizes, so that's not over. Having said that, maybe he can now focus on the next big thing, and maybe that is running Google. Whether he feels comfortable with leaving the UK and moving to Mountain View, I think is another matter. Maybe he would be okay with that. It's plausible. I wouldn't discount it.
Well, who knows what's going to happen in 2025, but Parmy Olson is as well positioned and as smart as anyone, well informed to know. Her book, Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World, won the FT Business Book of the Year for 2024. And Parmy, we will certainly talk again in 2025, ideally before December of next year, but we will.
Yeah.
This is the race that's shaping everything: technology, Silicon Valley, the future of America, China, so much more to it. Happy New
Yeah.
Year, Parmy. Congratulations
Oh,
again
thank
on
you.
your
Happy New
award,
Year
and we'll
to you
talk again
too.
soon.
Thank you.